change the things. This hour, this hour is that really. You got about.
Let's get started. So, before we start Martin's talk, we have a announcement. So this is for the research prize, the TAP research prize to Howard Shao. So congratulations. I don't know if Howard is here, but let's still give a online. So we got your multiple very strong applications. So then the committee decided to our related relate to self-consistently modeling of dark matter halo galaxy supermassive black hole connection. So this is a very interesting work. I encourage people to look up the paper and see this work. So okay, so after the announcement, I guess we can introduce today's speaker. It is a great pleasure to have Martin Prasad, MIMBAC and Research Arizona. So Professor Prasad started his career at the University of La Plata in Argentina and obtained his PhD actually here, US member of the Theoretical Astrophysics program in 2007. After that, he went to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton for 3 years, and then became a assistant professor in the Newbold Institute in Copenhagen. Let's see, where he founded the Theoretical Astrophysics Group in 2010. And currently, Martin is a professor in the Theoretical Astrophysics in Newbold International Academy, where he also acts as the deputy director. Martin has very broad research interest in astrophysics dynamics, spanning photoplanetary disk, black hole accretion disk, galaxy cluster, black hole binaries, and tidal disruption events. So with that, Martin is going to tell us about migration of low mass planet today. Please welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Susanna, for the invitation to give a talk here. I have to say this is very special for me because 20 years ago I was sitting in this chairs listening to that colloquium, and I benefited a lot from that. And I mentioned to my colleagues here now that I remember that one of the reasons I had to come to Arizona, even though I have very good offers from other schools, it was because of the theoretical astrophysics program. I thought it was an amazing opportunity to be able to talk to people in different departments, which I actually took advantage of, and it was very, very useful. So in a sense, it's a small token of my appreciation for what I learned here those years. So before I begin, yes, that's a good. Before I begin, share the screen. So before I begin, I like to mention that this work that I'm going to tell you about today would have never been possible without my collaborators, in particular Pablo Bernstein-Wein, who had the vision really to start looking at this problem in a very systematic way, and who worked very hard to understand the basis of this problem and some work to be done. And that will be the first part of the talk. And towards the second part of the talk, I will also mention the work that we have done more recently with Octavio Aguilera and Marcelo Villa-Ramanami, who all of these people happen to be from Argentina. In the second paper, I write with everybody from Argentina. So we are theorists, but our job is to explain somehow what we see, or sometimes what we don't see. So let me give you a very brief introduction. I'm going to say a couple of things. Is that I took the word colloquial very seriously, so I think that hopefully the level is going to be kept at the right height, so to speak, to allow everybody to understand everything I say. If something is not clear, of course, please stop me, and if I don't have the time to go into some details, I'm going to have to talk about these details later on. So very briefly, let me show you a plot, which I'm sure you have seen many, many times in the last year. This explosion of exoplanets that we now observe. And here I just want to make a very, very simple point. This, of course, heavily biased by the methods that we have to observe planets. There may be or not many more in this region of the plot. It's mass versus period. So here at 365 days, you have this one AU. And the only point I want to make is that within one astronomical unit, there is a lot of exoplanets with a very range in diversity in their sizes and compositions, all the way from things that are a little bit heavier than the Earth, there may be things that are like the Earth that we're just not seeing, and all the way up to things that have 10 Jupiter masses, which are very different, perhaps a rocky core with some very massive gaseous envelope. So our job is to understand at least how these things may have come to form and be there. And this, I'm going to give you a taste, and some of these things are going to be more clear than the talk, but it's just a few statements. One of the, there is a need and both a problem for migration to the planetary disk. Migration is a fancy word for things moving radially in the disk. And one of the problems is that, with very simple physics, you can actually show that planets that have essentially of the order of one Earth mass, they will essentially move throughout the disk very quickly in a time scale which is of the order of the lifetime of the disk. So essentially, this means, take it as face value, that you're trying to form something that has more than an Earth mass, and you lose it in the star before that happens. That's a standard, one of the standard problems. On the other hand, migration is actually necessary, because today we see, even though there are different models, that what happens is that, one problem is that we cannot form very, very massive planets with a very big envelope very close to the star, because just the material is not there. So one potential solution is, somehow you form these rocky cores, they accrete gas where they actually can do it farther out, and then you move them in. So migration there, would be something that you actually need. On the other hand, because of essentially the building blocks that you need to put those giants together, actually end up falling to the star fairly quickly, is still a bit of a problem. So the point is that solving, understanding in a more or less systematic way, how we get to form these planets and they end up being located locations, is one of the biggest problems in planet formation theory today. This is also an image that you have seen many, many times, and I just wanted to make one very simple point, which is it is now very, very clear that dust is, is in the vast majority of this that we see in these stages. And the simple point is that we know there is gas, we know there is dust, and it's clear to understand what is happening in these environments. We need to understand the physics that of gas coupled to dust, if you want to understand how these systems form and evolve. And the reason to make this point is because the vast majority of what we have learned about migration of planets in the last few decades has been 99.9% on really dealing with gaseous disks. And I would argue by just looking at this, that in principle, it is a good idea to question whether dust, may have something to say in this process, especially because it is an unsolved process for us today. So, I'm going to appeal several times to your physical intuition, and I'm going to help you, and there are questions we can discuss that. I'm going to delay showing equations to a little bit later. So let me give you a very, very brief summary. There are several decades of theory going into this, and I'm going to perhaps oversimplify some aspects, but the idea is to just for you to understand the big picture. So if we only think about this method of gas, then it's very clear that if you actually put a planet embedded in this, people have known for a long time that these planets, because of its gravity, excite perturbations, and certain locations in the disk, so-called Livland resonances, is not very important, because the disk is made out of gas and perturbations can propagate in the form of waves, and these waves can interfere in a coherent way in certain locations. What ends up happening quite generically is that we see that when we put a planet, this is in steady state in the frame that rotates with the planets, co-rotating, and then we see these spiral density waves, which is an enhancement in the density perturbation. Okay, now, while generically enhancements in the density, the gas exerts a force on the planet, and these density waves pull the planet, producing a torque. Okay, and quite generically, these are such that the torque on the planet is negative, so the planet loses angular momentum, and if it were only up to this process, then the planet would move to the star very quickly. Okay, this is not the end of the story. These waves can actually generate a torque, but torques are not necessarily linked to waves and nothing else. Another example where you actually have motions in the disk exchanging angular momentum with the planet is in the case of the so-called horseshoe orbits. Without getting too technical, you might have seen versions of the three-body problem. We have a star, a planet, and then if you just imagine, for the sake of the argument, a test particle, if this particle is close to the co-rotation region of the planet, what happens is that in that co-rotating frame, if the particle is a little bit farther away, it's going to rotate slower. That's how Keplerian disk would work. And therefore, you're going to start slowly approaching the planet from the front. And then the planet gives a kick to, exerts a torque on the particle, and it has a negative sign, and therefore the particle loses a bit of angular momentum, goes to an orbit with a smaller radius. Now, because it's rotating faster, so eventually in this frame, it's going to catch up with the planet again. Okay? And then the process reverses, so to speak. This gets a kick with a positive torque, and then it goes all the way up. In the absence of dissipation, just in our particles, this process will go on forever, and it will also be like this, completely symmetric, if you want, from north to south. That means that as time goes by, there is an exchange of angular momentum between particles and planet, but there is no net exchange of angular momentum. Okay, nobody goes in or out over time. However, if these orbits were to be somehow asymmetric, for example, there is a bit more mass here than here, then that would produce a net torque. Okay? So as it happens, and I'm going to mention this in a moment, when you actually consider this was for test particles, if these were made out of gas, then particles of gas also follow this orbit, but gas is subject to pressure gradients, and these orbits can become asymmetric and exert a torque. So the point is that summary of 40 years of studying torques in gaseous disk is that, broadly speaking, there are two types of torques that can be exerted in a planet in the gaseous disk. One is so-called, the one that I first mentioned, the Lindblad torque, which is related to spiral density waves. And this tends to be very generically negative, so the planet will just migrate inwards quite fast. And then there is a so-called co-orbital torque, thinking out the torque exerted by particles of gas. And this one, rather generically, depends very strongly on the local dynamics to the planet, perhaps not strangely so, and in general tends to be positive. Okay, this can also be turned to be negative and turns positive. But the problem is that this one is larger in magnitude than this one, and overall, this leads to the problem of fast inward migration of planets in this. So this is just a rephrasing to solidify things. In a standard disk model, the Lindblad torque is slightly larger than the co-orbital torque, and then the planets move fast inwards. These are the standard models. There are models that people can actually consider that take bit better care of the thermodynamics close to the planet, or there could be some irradiation from the star impacting the distribution of gas close to the planet. And in some cases, one could actually make this co-rotation torque, which is positive, a little bit larger in magnitude than the Lindblad torque, and then momentarily you do hold migration inwards, or you then can move a planet outwards. But this requires a little bit of fine-tuning, and if you don't want to call that fine-tuning, what happens is that it doesn't really work very robust. Here is an example of a paper by Su et al. In 2014, where we are going to see similar things like this. This is called a map for the torque. This is planet mass, and this is a location in the disk. And then I'm not going to go into the details, but this model was such that depending how fast the planet can actually grow, there are regions in this parameter space where the torque is actually positive, and then the planet overall migrates outwards. Whereas, if the planet cannot grow so fast, then it follows, so to speak, the standard theory, and then it, grows in mass slowly and migrates inwards. So there are such islands of positive torque, but one thing that I want you to appreciate is that within this region, which is of interest to us, of 1AU, this is a logarithmic plot, so this is really a small region of the plot, quite generically, planets just move inwards. So this is not, it may work in some cases, but it's not, I would say, a robust mechanism from preventing things to migrate inwards. So far, I have not mentioned the word dust, but what about dust? Because I convinced you, hopefully, there was plenty of dust to worry about in interplanetary disk. By mass, dust is not a large component, it's only 1%. And we believe, but it's difficult to speculate, that this may have been one of the reasons for which people put off for so long looking at the dust in any detail. Because if the mass is not that big, how come the torques will actually be important? So my job is to try to convince you that at least one should not dismiss this and study the problem carefully, because it actually can be important. So I talk about gaseous torques. Let me give you also a high level, so to speak, summary or planetary torques in dust disk. And for this, I need to bring a few pieces of physics that you may usually not put together, but I try to help you understand what is going on here. So if we just have dust particles in the absence of gas, then when they are close to the planet, they are going to follow these horseshoe orbits that I mentioned before. Okay, and the time it takes for them to go back and forth is so-called the libration time, and that depends on how wide these co-orbital orbits are. Okay, and you can actually show that when in the absence of gas, then the width of this horseshoe orbit is proportional to the Hill radius, which essentially is a measure of the planet of the torque or its mass. And just because we are going to use this a couple of times, this is a plot in Cartesian coordinates, which is co-rotating with the planet. This is a plot in polar coordinates, which is azimuth and radius, but you can just get a different picture from this, where the particle comes here and goes back, and then goes back here, and this is periodic in azimuth. The point I want to make here is that for the gas component, you can actually show in the calculations that the horseshoe width, so the width of this region here, depends depends differently whether the planet is massive or not. And I'm going to be very hand-wavy here, but what you can see is that if the planet has a very, very, very small mass, then gas does worry our pressure gradients, and you can see how for some very, very small planet masses, then how wide this region is depends both on the thermodynamics of the disk and the gravity of the planet. There is a point where gravity wins, so to speak, for enough massive planet, and then you have two different regimes. Okay. So a second piece of physics that was on horseshoe dynamics has to do with the dynamics of dust in a differential rotating disk, which is made out of gas. And what is interesting here is to understand that because the disk is made out of gas and it has partial pressure support, then the gas itself rotates in a sub-Keplerian way. Gas particles inherently, if there were no gas, would like to rotate like in a Keplerian fashion. When you put these things together, you want dust particles that want to rotate in a Keplerian way, but the gas is rotating slower. The particle constantly see a headwind, and in that way, it loses momentum in a symmetrical direction. That's a torque, and therefore loses angular momentum and drifts radially to the star. This, by the way, is an actual problem for planet formation theories, but people can also be looking at this problem. I don't worry about that. All I care for you to understand is that dust particles embedded in a gaseous disk, then naturally we have on a time scale to drift inwards. Okay, and this is again a polar representation of this kind of physics. And this is radius, azimuth, particles moving like this, and you can actually measure and calculate for a given size of a particle and for a given disk how fast this particle is drifting. Okay, and it turns out that the speed at which particles drift depends primarily on the particle size, which is parameterized in something called Stokes number, what I mentioned in a second, and also the properties of the gas disk. So without going into details, what I care for you to understand is the following. If the particles are really, 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 really tiny, and this Stokes number is proportional to the size of the particle, so Stokes number very, very small, then inherently they have to be very well coupled to the gas. Yes, in the limit where I take, a dust particle to be a molecule, there should be perfect coupling. So therefore, in that limit, there should not be a radial drift between gas and dust because they are very well coupled. In the opposite limit, where the dust particle is very, very, very heavy, then essentially it will not care about the gas being there because it will just rotate in a Kepler way. So there is a sweet spot, so to speak, for size of particles, which are defined by Stokes numbers for the unity, in which this drift speed is fastest. Okay, that's all I need. But now, understand this. I already told you a few interesting things. If dust horseshoe orbits were completely symmetric in the absence of gas, then they could not exert the torque. Yes, because of symmetry. But now I'm telling you that when I introduce dust in the presence of gas, something funny happens. On the one hand, the co-orbital region depends on the dust on the physics of the problem, but also now the dust drifts through this co-orbital region. Okay, so now it's a matter of time scales. If the drift happens very, very fast, then the dust may go through these horseshoe orbits too quickly, and they can develop asymmetries. So this is the rest of the slides, but the idea behind this is fairly simple. So I guess I was just jumping ahead of myself a little bit. So I hope you are convinced about this. If the dust horseshoe orbits are completely symmetric, there is no net torque exerted by the dust. On the other hand, if they are completely empty, that's also a form of symmetry. There is no dust in this horseshoe region, there will be nothing to exert a net torque on the planet. Okay? So I'm not going to go into the details, but you can actually show for what I said before on how the width of the horseshoe region depends on pressure and gravity for gas. I also told you that for very small gas particles, they behave like gas, and therefore we should expect the width of these regions to be different whether we consider very small particles or very large. I'm not going to go into the details. This can be done in a piece of paper, but the important thing is that we can actually calculate, based on the properties of the dust, how big is this orbital region for a given Stokes number, and then the time, the libration time to go back and forth is inversely proportional to that. And the other time scale is the radial drift for a given Stokes number that depends on how wide is that region and how fast particles can go through it. And you can do that calculation, and you can actually show in this plot, which has interesting parameters for us, is the mass of the planet versus the Stokes number. These are regions of space in which, below this black line, all of these are that the drift is faster than the libration time. So a particle wants to librate, and if you were to able to do it successfully, completely symmetrically, would not accept the torque. But if it's drifting faster than it can go back and forth, then it starts to librate, it's present there, but by the time you try to see what is happening, if you catch it with the planet, in the south, so to speak, it's gone. Okay, so the point is that this is not a demonstration, but I'm arguing that in the very large parameter space that we have identified with these arguments an interesting region in parameter space where we can expect the dust orbits in this rotation region to be severely affected by drift. Okay, it's not a demonstration, but I show you that this is what actually happens. So summary, if you need to catch your breath with all of this, perhaps some things are new to you, is that when you only consider gas, there are two sources for the torque exerted by the gas into the planet. One is the Lindblad torque, usually negative. The other one is the orbital torque, usually positive. This one is slightly more negative, so to speak, that this one positive. So absent dust, then this wins over this, and planets move inwards. This is a framework of standard migration series today. What I just argued a moment ago, and now we can forget all of the complicated things that I said, is that when dust is present, there is a region of parameter space in the mass of the planet and the particle size of Stokes number, where things are going to be different in the sense that the dust horseshoe orbits, which would be symmetric in the absence of gas, can actually develop asymmetries. So our job is to understand how important these asymmetries are and see this has a, what kind of sign this has and how big they can be. So, we try to push this as far as we could analytically, develop these arguments. But of course, to solve this problem, you have to do it numerically. This is where the brilliance of Pablo came in. And I should say, a lot of the work leading to being able to run the simulations was also done with Leonardo, implementing Dust physics in the Fargo 3D code. So I'm just going to show you a flavor of the result we got. If you are, I hope you are not the question of BERT, because this is the beauty of the theoretical astrophysics program. You should all know theory, but I know that not all of you work on this subject. So let me just show you this quickly. I like to show which equations are being solved, but it's not super relevant that we look into the details. So these are essentially equations for fluid dynamics in a two-dimensional disk, where we have the gas component, continuity, dust component, continuity, and then momentum for the gas, momentum for the dust. And an important thing to point out here is that there is a coupling drag force between the gas and the dust, which is proportional to the difference in the velocities. And the gas will see naturally gradient pressure, whereas the dust is being modeled as a continuous fluid that is very, very cold, so it does not respond to pressure. Okay, so that's the big difference between gas and dust. Then the other quantities here are already standard, the Keplerian frequency. The Stokes number is written like this, or ST. I apologize for that discrepancy, but I think it's going to be clear for the context. And then epsilon is the ratio, it's the dust to gas mass ratio between, the dust to mass ratio in the system, okay? And that only enters here and not here, and that's because this equation is proportional to the gas density, whereas the drag force is proportional to the dust density. So when you divide by the dust density, you obtain this ratio here, but that is not present here. The reason this point is important is because, remember I told you, we think that about 1% of the mass of the system is in dust. So I would argue epsilon, 10 to minus 2 is small. So to a first approximation, we can actually neglect this term. This perhaps may not be a great idea if epsilon is 1, but to begin with, we are starting with very low content of dust. Let me just close this out. The reason this is important is because this was the only place in the equations when this mass ratio entered. So this says that the dynamics that we are going to solve are actually independent of the mass ratio, provided the mass ratio is small enough. Okay? And then actually implies, because now we have dynamics that do not care about this ratio, but the torque exerted by the mass distribution is proportional to the mass. Therefore, naturally, the torque exerted by the dust is going to be linear in this point. Okay? So I think this is all that we need to know. Yes? Yes.
So for the term in the dust equation, is it really no epsilon, or is it 1 minus epsilon?
No, there is no, because here the momentum equation for the dust is proportional to the dust density. And the force, the drag force, is proportional to the dust density as well. So, essentially you divide that by that. Here you have raw gas, and initially you have, you have raw gas here, and here raw dust, because this is proportional to raw dust. But when you divide by raw gas here, you have this ratio. Yes, so that's a good point. So let me just emphasize this. In the absence of this term, there is no trace in the equations of what the actual mass ratio is, provided it's small enough. The dynamics are not sensitive to that. So just very quickly to show you, what we actually do. Pablo did the simulations. The gravitational potential is essentially that of the star, the interaction with the planet, and this term here, because this is being done in the system where the star remains fixed for convenience, and therefore you have to account for that. But just to introduce the quantities, the mass ratio, there is some dimension as the position of the planet. This is smoothing length that I'm not going to go into the details, but has to, for the problem to be well behaved, you actually have to put something here so this has to go up. And you have to be conscious about and test that the way of doing this smoothing length does not impact your results. And then the azimuthal position of the planet, which is taken to be 0 here in the correlating plane. And I'm not going to invest too much time on this, but I do want to mention that all of these simulations have been done with the Fargo 3D code, which developed by Pablo and by, also in collaboration with Leonardo, especially in the part that has to do with implementing the dust. this public code. So we hope that people are going to follow the steps and, reproduce the results and take over doing more interesting things. And one point to mention is that because of the dynamics are very sensitive close to the planet, we put special care in designing the grid where things actually were, well resolved. And so we believe that the results that we got were robust, and we were very careful in this part of the work. The initial conditions to set up this problem are literally a two-dimensional disk, which is made out of gas and dust. You can actually look for the state solution of this. There will be a drift between these two components. And then, we put the planet there and let it go, let it switch to state. So the run of the mill, so to speak, outcome of this kind of exercise, friendly simulations, looks like this. The star is somewhere here in the middle. There is a planet here with a relatively low mass, I don't remember exactly the number. You can see here the spiral density weights in the gas that I showed before. And here you can see, and I'm going to go into more details, what happens with the dust. Essentially here, black means a deficit of dust, very low density. And what you notice here is that it's a very big hole, let's call it for lack of a better word in the dust density. Yes, this is the asymmetry I was talking about, in the sense linked to that of this horseshoe region. Okay, because the dust comes here, wants to go back, but by the time it wants to come back, it drifts towards the star. So you develop a hole. Okay, so to put these things together, because I'm going to show you plots like this is gas, this is dust. But if I overlay this on top of this, yes, I will still see the lack of dust, so to speak. So this is shown in only one slide here to make all the points together, is that this is the inner spiral wake, the outer spiral wake, and remember that if it were only up to this, the planet would migrate inwards. Now we overlay the dust distribution, and you can see in black here the absence of dust. And the point is that you can see now here by eye is that the absence of dust, so to speak, is more severe in the back of the planet than in front. So naturally, this looks like there is more dust in front of the planet. Something is pulling you. That's a positive torque. This naturally wants to make you move outwards because you gain angular momentum. Okay, so that's the big difference between the gas and the dust. Of course, this could not happen with dust alone. You need both of them to work together, and this is a natural outcome. So this is very nice. Maybe we just tweak the parameters, to convince you that this is working, and then we move on, and we know better than that. This was one out of, I think, 200 simulations that Pablo ran, and here we order the plots in a nice way. So here is increasing mass from 0.33 Earth masses to 10 solar masses. That's my black hole background. 10 Earth masses, and the Stokes number here. And without going into too many details, you see several trends, essentially for larger Stokes numbers and higher masses for the planet, then these asymmetries tend to be larger. Here you can see that for low mass planets, there is really nothing strange happening in the gas. And what happens is that if the mass of the planet and the Stokes numbers are the right ones, you start to actually open a gap in the dust component. And when you open a gap, remember, this would be complete symmetry in the orbital region. So here, the dust component will cease to be efficient to produce a positive torque. Yes. Yes.
What's the thermal mass in these simulation comparisons?
What do you call the thermal mass?
Aspect ratio Q times the mass of the star?
Or Q?
Yeah.
These are all self-thermal. But H here, what was your H?
What's
Or
that?
0.05, very steep.
Saying the thermal mass would be on the upper end of this scale here.
I guess so. And this, we really went up there just to see when, let me continue for a second, but you will see that here, essentially, the dust is no longer efficient, right? Because you open a gap in the dust. So I just want to say a few words here. So this is a standard isothermal alpha disk. Isothermal means in the vertical direction. This is a temperature gradient in radius. There are some caveats that I'm going to come back at the end of the talk, but for simplicity, the planet is in a circular orbit and it remains fixed there. That's a caveat. Certainly, the planet would migrate, but here for 50 orbits, you can see that the planet is still there, and you just use these measures to measure the torque. there's a single dust species with a fixed Stokes number. And if you remember in the definition of Stokes number, there was the size of the particle, and then there was some density of, for the gas. And if the density of the gas changes as a function of radius, then your Stokes number should change. And if you start aggregating particles and they grow, the Stokes number should also change. So this is a proxy to have some control of the size of the particles, but it's not the most realistic thing that one should do. But as a first step, and to keep track of things, is a useful thing to do. And all of the simulations reach steady state very, very quickly within 50 orbits, which was the reason for which we were able to do this for so many disks. And once these simulations have reached steady state, the good news is that you can go there, measure the distribution of the mass of the gas, the distribution of the mass in the dust, and then compute, literally the torques on the planet. Yes? And if you do that in each of these instances, you don't have to worry about time. There is already steady state. Each of these simulations, by definition, is characterized by a mass of the planet and a Stokes number, and then you can make this map. So here we have the mass of the planet, and this is in Earth masses, and here we have the Stokes number. Okay, and what this is showing is the log of the ratio between the dust torque and the modulus of the gas torque. It's the modulus because in all of this friction particle space, the gas torque is negative. And we don't want to take the log of that, right? And the color is such that, so the gas torque is negative everywhere. The dust torque is positive almost everywhere, so it will kick planets out almost everywhere, except, these points here, where there is some complicated dynamics, and these have some implications, but we're not going to worry much about that. So in these very few cases, we also take the absolute value of the dust torque. But the bottom line is that the color coding here is such that in the blue regions in this map, the dust torque, is positive and dominates over the gas torque by a factor of a few. So naturally, a planet, say with this mass and for particles this Stokes number, we want to migrate outwards. Yes, and essentially, same thing is true here. Whereas in this region, that means that the dust torque is very inefficient, and therefore you just have standard migration theory in this amount of gas, even though there is gas present, you cannot do much. Okay? And just if you squint your eyes a little bit, you can recognize in this parameter space, mass and Stokes number that you saw before, this kind of shape here. Remember that I argued that it was going to be an interesting region parameter space where the drift piece of the particles was going to be faster than the divergence time, and therefore we should expect in that region to, for the corrotation orbits in the dust to develop asymmetries. Yes, and that indeed happens until the planet is, massive enough that you start to carve a gap in the dust, and therefore the dust ceases to be efficient to, provide a net torque, positive torque to make planets move out. So here, just to show a couple of things, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We chose some specific simulations where we actually wanted to understand how the dust dynamics was different and try to get a handle of what was going on. So these are 4 simulations for 2 Earth masses for different Stokes number. And if you remember, I said that the width of the horseshoe region was going to be here dominated by pressure and gravity, and here only by gravity. So these are actually 2 different regimes. And we also pay attention to these 2 simulations because it's difficult for you to see, but this one is slightly blue. It's almost white, but it's kind of blue. And this one is a little bit red. Okay, so let me just show you here. If we look at the simulations with 2 Earth masses, we can see that these lines are actually tracing the lines for the dust, and this is how horseshoe orbits look like in the presence of radial drift. It's not obvious, but they look like that. Essentially, you have dust drifting like this, interacts with the planet, and essentially keeps moving radially. And what you see as you move in Stokes number space, so to speak, is that you start developing this hole here, and here you can see this is much wider for larger Stokes numbers than it was here. And something just to test, we actually put a particle here, and actually this is an unstable region. So even if somehow managed to put dust there somehow, this would just migrate outward. So this naturally opens a hole behind the planet. And therefore it looks like more dust is in front, and that's your positive torque. And the second thing that I wanted to show, remember these two triangles that I showed you, this was slightly blue, this one was slightly red, meaning here the dust torque is still efficient, and that's because the stream lines are such that you have the dust, a stream of dust pulling you from the front, but there is dust absent here. When you grow up a little bit this Stokes number, what happens is that by this mass, the planet can actually exert a strong kick in the particles, and then this part that was here before for this Stokes number is no longer here. So essentially what happens is that this is a moment where in parameter step space, we start opening the gap. And you're efficient in opening the gap, that gap is symmetric. So the dust torque ceases to be efficient. Okay? So even though I didn't say this, in the actual title of the talk, when I submitted my abstract, this is the low mass part of the talk. It is for this region of parameter space, up to 10 Earth masses, that the dust torque has a chance of actually being successful in holding planets from falling. So, a summary, what we have learned so far is that there could be large torque that can arise from the dust component if the right conditions are met. Most importantly, we do not need very crazy mass densities in the dust. This was all done with 1% of the mass of the system in the dust. The thing is that if you have the right planet mass and the right size of the particle, this torque can actually, because what I show you now, can be very efficient. And because of what I said, dust-driven migration can actually stop. Dust-driven migration can be more efficient for small bodies, yes, but this is an important part of the history of forming a planet. So therefore, the dust torques can, in principle, have potential modification for migration history of planets. And of course, this is a very first step, and I will not be shy in telling you how many seeds we have left out, but we argue that this is the first step in looking at this problem systematically, and we can build from this. And I will come back to this in the end of the talk. So I talked a lot already. I hope I managed to convince you somehow that we know what we're doing, the physics, the right physics to consider, and the thing to know now is that dust torques can actually play an important role in the formation history of time. But this was only about having torques measured. We have yet to understand if those torques were in place, how the planet would move, right? Which we need to understand if we want to talk about migration. So the second part of the talk is more recent work that has to do with orbital evolution. Okay, so for this we need a couple of ingredients. I'm going to try to keep the details light, but I'm happy to answer more questions. And the basic piece of physics is that the angular momentum of the planet is essentially the mass of the planet, the angular frequency of the planet, and the radius squared. If you take the derivative of this with respect to time, that's the torque by definition, and that essentially you can recast. Because there is an r squared here, you end up having a dr dt, that's your radial velocity for the planet, and you can invert this, and you can actually put the radial velocity of the planet in terms of the torque exerted on the planet. Yes? So if I have a model for the torque, or if I can measure torques, then I actually can solve the equation of motion for the planet. There's a small inconsistency which are not high, that when we measure torques, the planets were not moving. Right? We measure them in over 50 orbits. And if the planet moves and then the torque change response to that, that needs to be considered. But this is a first good step. We're going to use the models for the torque that we measure, the approximations and assumptions that we have, and try to push this and see what we learn. Okay? A second component of this is because this now planet is going to be moving in a disk, we need a model for the disk. We try to keep this simple. We either use the simplest versions of the alpha disk model with the density and the temperature profile that depend only on radius. And in some instances, we did a more refined modeling considering the vertical structure of the disk. But at the end of the day, the most important features of what we learned are not too sensitive to this, which in some respects is good news. These are just so. This is perhaps the heaviest slide I have with equations, but I just want to make a point that in principle, what one would like to do, ideally, is to put a planet, put a density distribution for the dust, and have a gaseous disk, and let the whole scene evolve, measure torques, solve the distribution of motion for the planet. We managed to do the lot of simulations by saying, hey, it's very expensive. So after the first step, we came up with an idea which works well, or we know it should work, And then we took a little bit of leap of faith, hoping that we can still learn something new, which is the following. In the absence of dust, one can run the simulations that I showed you before and measure the torque exerted by the gas alone. And people have been doing this for a long time. And the results, quote unquote, are simple enough that you can parameterize those with the analytical expression for the torque. By definition, when there is no dust, this works. This is how this was obtained. Okay? So our little leap of faith that we're going to keep using this even in the presence of dust. Because what we have measured from simulations is the ratio of the torque, gas torque to the gas torque. So the bottom line is that in an isothermal disk, which is a temperature gradient in the regular direction and density gradient, of course, but is vertical isothermal, this equation has proven to show that you can properly parameterize results obtained with many simulations. So we're going to use this as our model for the gas torque. Yes.
I don't understand why you're saying it's a leap of faith. I mean, in principle, you could measure the torques independently in the.
Yes, but the point is that now, when I'm going to talk in a moment, we essentially are parameterizing the structure of the entire disk by coefficients like this, and immediately saying what the gas torque is, instead of actually setting that up and running the simulation. If we were to do it for the simplest model for the gas disk, we will get this result. The problem is that we are going to start considering some more complicated models for disks, also using some other recipes for torques for those disks, and we are no longer running simulations of the entire system.
Right, but so if I take but if I take one of the simulations from the
Yes.
first part of the talk, you didn't have feedback turned on, so you should be recovering this result in the
Yes.
simulations as well.
Yes, that's what I said. For the simulations that we use, by definition, if you want, for the
Right.
simulations that we use,
They have to be.
exactly, yes. But remember, let me emphasize that, the fact that the epsilon in the ratio of gas to gas was 0 did not mean that the gas did not talk to the dust. So in that sense, understand my point?
But there's no feedback in the simulation that you showed.
There is no feedback of the dust into the gas.
Exactly.
Okay,
Right,
You're
and
right,
so,
you're right, you're
so
right,
if
you're
you
right,
turn
yes.
on the feedback,
Exactly,
that in
exactly.
principle, for some epsilon, that will no longer.
exactly, you're right. Yes. All right. So the thing I want to mention here is that if you know the structure of the disk, so to speak, and we're not going to worry about much of the details. This is a positive number. This is negative here. This is a negative gaseous torque that leads to inward migration, and this at the end of the day is a number. The scale of the physics in the problem is scale such that they depend on this so-called gamma stands for torque on the planet, and this you can get by just dimensional analysis. It depends on the density of the gas, the force power of the position of the planet, and then the angular frequency of the planet. And then when the people that have done this carefully have found that there are some other dependencies on the mass ratio of the planet to the star, and then also on the height of the disk. These are details, but this is what actually has the right units, and this is how the problem scales. So perhaps what we were discussing a moment ago will be more clear now. Remember that I told you, and I hope you agree with this, that the dynamics of the dust was insensitive to the mass ratio, but the torque itself, because it depends on the density of the dust, has to be proportional to that dust density. So here, even though we run simulations only for 1/100th of this mass ratio, we know exactly how things should scale with epsilon. This is modulo, and I'm not going to cheat on this, that we said, that ratio cannot be very close to unity. But if you change by a factor of 2 or 4 or 5, it's case linear, okay? And one could also feel tempted to make this a factor of 100, but one should not trust those results because that was not considered in the solutions. But, of epsilon order of a few, which is going to be interesting and important, those should scale linear. Now, the second point is that, and this is an assumption where we are going to avoid, so another thing that I perhaps, I did mention, but, I think I want to stress important, when we run the simulations, we put the planet at one specific location, at 1 AU, right? Now, because the models we were using were essentially power loss in density and temperature, actually more important, power loss in density, we would have gotten that result. It doesn't matter where we put the planet because everything was scale free. Okay, but if I do more complicated things, with disks that are no longer power loss in radius, which we're going to consider, it's no longer obvious that that result will hold at any given location. So here, we actually are going to assume that because it was a natural scaling the problem a moment ago, that the dust ratio, the torque of the dust is gonna scale. So this is a scaling with mass density, right? It's linear. Now, this is the torque where the planet is at the dust density that we considered before. Then this is going to scale with radius in such a way that that is going to be encapsulated by the gamma planet that I showed you a moment ago. So the thing is that with these two things, even though we run simulations at one specific location for one specific dust to mass gas ratio, we actually know how to scale these torques anywhere in the disk and for different dust densities. So here we are now, in principle, if anybody doubts that it's a good idea, you can of course go and run a full numerical simulation and see how good of an approximation this was. But as a first step, we use these two things together, that the dust torque scales linear with the dust to gas mass ratio, and that we understand how this is going to scale with radius in the same way that the gas does. And when we put these things together, what we actually have is that the torque that we want to use to understand the dynamics of the planet in the disk depends on where the planet is located and the gas to gas mass ratio. This part is linear in the gas to gas mass ratio, and this ratio, which is the ratio between the torque exerted by the dust and the one by the gas, this is precisely the map that we have. Okay, so with these two things, we can now essentially follow a planet through the disk and understand at that location with that dust density what the torque exerted on it is going to be. So this was a lot of computing time and many simulations, but of course this is just two cores to integrate the equations of motion and function of radius, because the planet would be jumping discontinuously, so to speak, and that's not nice. So the way to address that is, this was a plot showing you the ratio of the torque exerted by the dust to the gas. You can actually just plot the one that is exerted by the gas component, and you can do bilinear interpolation, and this smooths out this map. And then the bottom line, if you want to take this sentence to move forward, is that we have a way to model, based on simulations, the torque exerted by the dust component as a function of Stokes number and mass. Yes? So in principle, if I consider this made out of particles, I start with a planet at a given location. I may want to say that that planet accretes matter, and as it increases its mass, it's going to move, so to speak, in this map, and I can track the orbital evolution, and I can solve consistently, so to speak, by its dynamics, taking into consideration the torques exerted both by the gas and the dust. I never forgotten about the gas. I was putting emphasis on the dust because it's the new component. So this, I guess, what I was trying to say before, Caitlin, is that, because the end goal is to actually deal with more realistic disks, it was not the first step I wanted to take. We just did the standard alpha disk, for which I didn't have to have a leap of faith. I knew what I was doing. Here, we are actually going to consider, this is a bit of a strange plot, but this is comparing the isothermal structure of a disk versus the non-isothermal, where you actually have to solve for the vertical structure of the disk, because this is what people do when they do population synthesis model and compare to observations. These straight lines are exactly the results I was quoting before for the temperature gradient and the density gradient. So they are straight lines, that those are power loss, and everything works fine. Here, my leap of faith now, if you want, is that we are going to use the same idea before, that we are going to parameterize the torques based on these coefficients that have to do with structure of the disk, based on formulae that people have already derived. Okay, and the argument is that if we were to do the same, we will actually obtain the same results. But let's remember that there is no dust in the simulation, so it is an approximation. So the bottom line is that, as I showed you before, that very simple formula for the gas torque when the disks were power loss, people have also developed formulas for these gas torques in more complicated disks. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details, but you can see that because these are no longer power laws, when you follow the density of the profile, you would expect, things to, some features of this to show in the radial structure of what we're doing. So to give you some peace of mind, if we are standing at the given location in the disk, for example, at 1AU, and this is equivalent of the smooth version of the original map that we did with Pablo for this torque, Stokes number mass. This is a ratio of the total torque. So gas plus gas scaled by this quantity that gave the dimensions of the problem. And you can see here, you can recognize those blue regions that I pointed before, where the gas torque is stronger than the gas torque, and you naturally get power migration. And this one, this is for isothermal disk, and this is for non-isothermal disk. And the point is that at the given this location, these two things are not very different. This is perhaps to be expected. However, when you actually look as a function of radius, then this one is going to be featureless, as it is, mass for these Stokes numbers. As a function of radius, these are featureless because they were power laws, and the dependencies on radius were encapsulated on this parameter gamma p. Here you can see, the radial structure of the disk, because this gamma p has a radial dependence, but the structure of the disk itself is a bit more complicated. So this is what you see, and this has some impact in the results we're going to see. So I think with this, we are ready to show you, I guess, the core of some of the results of this second part of the talk. And I know there is a lot of information in this plot, so I'm just going to guide your eyes to see some important things. So these are now plots that show, depending on the mass of the planet versus distance to the star, how the planet moves under different circumstances. If the disk in which they are embedded are only made out of gas, those are shown here with dotted lines or dashed lines, right? This is a standard, prediction of, standard migration theory. When you only have gas, the reason, these are moving so fast is the problem that we have to actually form either, Earth or cores of giant planets. In the absence of gas, they shall move inwards. And this is only for 1% of the mass of the dust in the system, and this is for different Stokes numbers. And there's a lot of information here. What I want to point out is that we have to assume some way in which these planets would actually increase their mass as they are accreted from the gas disk. And from that, this can be made in very fancy ways. There are people here and very conscious working in detail of how planets actually grow their mass. But all we did here, to keep it simple, so to speak, and get the flavor, is just assume some constant rate at which these planets grow in mass. And what you can see here is in different colors that, if the planet grows mass at 10 to minus 4 Earth masses per year, then essentially it grows so fast that, if there doesn't have time to move, so to speak, even though this is not accepted, it grows so fast that it ends up being at the same location in town market. Whereas those that, accrete mass lower, actually have time to react to the gas torque. So here, the point that I want to make is that the solid lines, in some cases for Stokes numbers for the 0.1, actually end up moving outwards. Okay? I'm not claiming this is a solution to the migration problem. I'm just saying that with standard physics for dust, solving this problem for the first time without doing anything strange, with some reasonable assumptions, we actually get quite naturally for different particles sizes, that the planets actually go out. Here is a different version of this, where we actually compare this is a standard alpha disk model, which is vertical isothermal. There is a structure in the vertical direction, and these are disks that have structure in vertical direction, but dissipate in time with some prescription, just to understand what the impact would be. And I guess what you can tell by looking at these plots is that if the planet is accreting at a very low rate of gas from the environment, if in the meantime the disk dissipates, the planet runs out of mass, right? So you can see here that the dynamics, what is going on is stronger for low accreting planets. But again, genetically, you get some situations in which planets actually either just move outwards. I think the simulations were either stopped when the planet reached 0.1 AU or 100 AU, or a few mega years. And here you see a situation when they start to migrate outwards, and because of the structure of the torque map that I showed you, eventually they also move inwards for Stokes number for the 0.1. And here's a situation where the planets actually stop growing and they stay there just because, by hand, we, took away mass in the disk. Okay? So this is a bit artificial because there are knobs, but actually it's a pretty good flavor of the kind of impact that the dust storm can actually have. And the last plot I want to show you like this before I give my summary is we then try a different exercise when we increase the mass ratio by just factor of 2, not 100, just 2, and then 5, and then 10. And we understood what is the impact of doing, these integrations. And actually it's quite strong, even a factor of 2 in the dust density or 5. In all of these cases, you're actually having planets that always move away from the place in which they were born. Okay, for modest increase in dust. So I think in the interest of time, I want to tell you that I have a slide on all of the things that we have not considered, and I'm happy to discuss and tell you what we think is the impact of this. That shows you that there is a lot of work to be done. But what I would like to do is just, I guess, this is a summary of which I saw in the plots, and which I can discuss in detail again, but this is just the last few plots that I showed you. I would like to leave you with one slide as a summary. I was taught my advisor here once, with the subject, that I should never end the talk with a long laundry list. So here is my summary slide, where I actually just, if you take something from this talk, is that the dynamics of the low mass planets embedded, this is where we started, the dynamics of low mass planets embedded in dusty disk. And the bottom line is that actually planets can slow down their migration inwards, or even in some cases revert it and go outwards. And then this is the first time, to our knowledge, that all of these things can put together into calculating for the first time evolutionary tracks of planets, and the very simple assumptions that actually show as a proof of concept, actually, this very big problem that people have, and sometimes I'm solving in a perhaps not very natural way, not in dust, perhaps has a more simple explanation, just considering the physics of the problem. I like to mention, it was not obvious, that migration is one of the few problems in protoplanetary disk where dust until now has been ignored. For everything else I want to do to understand planet formation, you better have dust. It's a very important component. So this is our first humble attempt to remedy this. And with that, I thank you.
So maybe we take one question.
Yeah, super interesting. I had a question about the first part with the dust depletion, the asymmetric one.
Yes.
Have you thought of any potential observational inference that could test your prediction?
Literally speaking, if everything I said, were, correct, I mean, you should, there's several issues, right? If I remember, I only consider one dust species, right? Assuming that, that is correct, that, you have a particular stock number expansion of position, but in principle, this, should show as a, absence of emission in dust. But of course, the reality is more complicated. You have a dust distribution, and there may be, perhaps the parties that are emitting and not those that are responsible for this physics. So in order to do that, I know, Pablo and Leonardo have been working on including many dust species to understand this problem. I think once we have that, we will be in a better position to understand how easy it is to see this. Also, there is a matter of time scale. Things happen pretty fast. Then perhaps the gaps that we observe are, long-lived. That's the reason we just see them. And perhaps, catching a system in the process where, the physics is such that you are developing this asymmetry, that may happen too fast, theoretically speaking. And then we may see it by chance, but it's not something we expect to see very easy. But it's a very good point to test this.
Yeah, so I see there are many questions. So let's do the following. So Martin will be around for the whole week. So please sign yourself up to talk to Martin. We are bringing him to dinner. So if you're interested in joining, please let me know. We are over time. So if you have to go, feel free to do it. But if you have time, feel free to stay and ask.
I'm happy to stay here. I will not give a longer talk, but I'm happy to discuss.